And you'll all get your checks after.
I've been asked to remind you to please turn off your cell phones. Also to announce that Louise Penny will be signing books after our conversation, and she will be taking questions from the audience, so we'll try to squeeze everything in. My name is Maureen Corrigan. I'm the book critic for NPR's Fresh Air. Woo! Thank you. As well as a regular mystery reviewer for the Washington Post. Yes. I have been attending and participating in the National Book Festival for the last 18 years. During that time, I've had the pleasure and privilege of interviewing so many authors whose work I admire. But I have to tell you, Louise Penny is in a class by herself. It's true. It's true. As soon as I heard that Louise was going to be here at the National Book Festival, I emailed Maria Rana, who runs this whole amazing event, and I said, you must let me interview Louise Penny, or else, right? I think I share with many of you really almost a sense of awe. I don't know how to characterize your mysteries. I read them, and well, when I reviewed Glass Houses, which is the mystery we're talking about today, which has just come out in paperback, when I reviewed it a year ago, when it came out in hardcover, I said this. I'm going to quote myself in the Washington Post. This was my first two sentences. Every August for the past few years, I've read the latest Armand Gamache detective novel by Louise Penny, and every August for the past few years, I've been ruined for reading all other books until the spell of Gamache dissipates a bit. And I know that many of you feel that way too.
Thank you.
Louise Penny's mysteries are like no others. They're fiercely moral, they're witty, they're a bit profane. They include moments of cruelty, of poetry, of eccentricity, and ultimately I think they celebrate the saving grace of community. This Glass Houses is, what, your 13th book? Do I have that right?
It is.
It is, yes. I've got two books up here, a word about that in a second, but it's your 13th book. Louise's books debut reliably as the number one on the bestseller list as soon as they're out. Among your many, many, many other awards, you've won the Agatha for Best Mystery Novel 5 times, the Anthony for Best Mystery 5 times. I'll stop there, otherwise we'll...
Oh, no, go on. Feel free.
It's really, it's my great pleasure to welcome you. We welcomed you already, but welcome. Thank you for coming.
Thank you. I can't begin to tell you what an honor it is. I was just saying that I'm not sure that that the email had even completely landed in my inbox before I was saying yes. I don't even know that I was invited, but I said yes, and here I am.
Well, I want to start at the beginning of the 13 plus 1.
Right.
I know that you came to mysteries, to writing books, a bit belatedly.
Right.
And that you were in your 40s at the time you began writing.
Which now, from the age of 60, looks not that late.
I hear you. Why the mystery form? Why was that the form you chose?
That's a really interesting question. I started out, I was going to write the best book ever. It was going to be a work of transcendent genius. It was going to be historical fiction based on something that actually happened. And it was, as I said, going to be genius, so that my mother would be amazed and my former colleagues would be jealous. So that the professors who thought I was a dunderhead would have to rethink the whole thing. And I just got myself just so stressed about having to write the perfect book that I ended up suffering from writer's block for 5 years. 5 years. 5 years. You know, 3 would have been enough, but 5. got to the stage, Maureen, where Michael, my husband, was afraid to ask me how the book was going. It was like when I turned 35 and I was single, and my mother stopped asking me, you know, have you met any nice men lately? Have you met any women you like? Is there any farm animals you're finding attractive? She stopped asking anything, and Michael got to that stage where he stopped asking, how's the book going, dear? So then a couple of things had to happen. As a journalist, I discovered that in covering stories, often tragedies, of course, that while they might appear to happen out of the blue, in fact, they don't. It is a cascade of smaller events, often overlooked, that culminate in the one catastrophic event. But if you remove any single small event, if you turn left instead of right, if you put on pink instead of red, any often trivial thing, the major thing wouldn't have happened. And the same with great things in my life. And I look back on how did I get to be sitting here today. And still life came because of a series of really quite apparently small things. But one of them was I had one of the aha moments sitting on the side of my bed. Michael used to call me a horizontalist because I would spend most of my life trying to get horizontal somewhere on a sofa, in a bathtub. And my favorite place is lying on the bed reading, and still is. And I was preparing to do that when I looked on the bedside table. And there, piled high, all sorts of books, but very well represented was crime fiction. And I had one of those moments of just complete clarity. I thought, I need to finally write a book just for myself. A book I would read, a book that is written with joy, with gratitude, just for me. And it would be crime fiction, because I love reading crime fiction. And so that's where that came from.
I think it's interesting, in your list of people who you say you wanted to impress with the first novel, those professors who didn't think you were good enough, you know, and the Academy still does turn its nose down a bit at crime fiction. I can tell you, because I teach a course at Georgetown on detective fiction, and every once in a while my colleagues will say, oh, that must be fun. You know?
Right. Yeah, one day you'll be good enough to teach real books.
But
yeah, no, I know, it drives me crazy.
But you, like Raymond Chandler, started late. Raymond Chandler was in his 50s when he published The Big Sleep.
I didn't know that.
And I think of you and Raymond Chandler together because of that, and because also Chandler said he wanted to do something more with the mystery form. I think of you as doing something more with the mystery form. And one of the things I think you do is you make mysteries into spiritual investigations. You're thinking about the problem of evil and why it exists in the world, why it exists in people's souls. Am I reading too much into you? I mean, I don't think I am. But.
No, but it's a very difficult issue for me to talk about or question to answer. And I thank you for saying that I'm doing something new with the genre. And I'm very proud to be a crime writer. But I also, when I started writing Still Life, I didn't know that there were rules at all. So I just, as I said, I just wrote, you know, without intending to break any of the rules. And one of the things I kind of like about Still Life, and in fact I think I like about the whole series, is that they adhere to the rules while at the same time I'm hoping sort of transcend the rules. That they are like neo-crime fiction, moving it forward, making it both crime fiction in the classic sense, but also blurring the lines with literary fiction and poetry and other things. So that's sort of how I came to it. Now I've forgotten what the question was.
Well, I was positing this big academic reading of your books.
No, the spiritual, yes, that's so true.
Yeah.
Thank you. I read a lot of poetry, as you can probably tell from the books, and I use quite a lot of poetry in it, but one of my favorites is Auden. And Auden's elegy to Yeats, clearly after Yeats died. One of the first lines is, "Mad Ireland hurt him into poetry," which is just a brilliant line. In that line, you understand everything you need to know about Ireland, about poetry, and about Yeats. And I think I connected with that line because I had to be hurt into writing as well. And I think out of that pain, I tried to write all my life, but I was raised with a lot of, quite a bit of affluence. I was very, very fortunate in my upbringing. I was never particularly hurt, and I was fairly self-absorbed and callow. And so a lot of what I was writing was out of ego. I wanted to have accolades. I wanted to sit in front of a room like this. This would have absolutely blown my 12-year-old mind. But it was writing from that ego place. And I really had to be hurt into writing. I had to be really humbled. I had to know a lot of grief and a lot of sorrow and a lot of loss. I had to come, I'm a recovering alcoholic, and I had to bottom. And I had to come to and through despair. I had to know what it felt like to stand in the middle of my living room and want to die. And the only reason I didn't die, and I'm a huge advocate of gun control, which isn't that difficult being a Canadian, frankly. It's hard to find a gun in Canada. Because I know had there been a gun in the house, I wouldn't be here today. So that sort of thing, you reach a fork in the road where you either die or become embittered, or you find something bigger than yourself. And I think that's what the books are about, what you find hope. You understand what it is to find a community and a sense of belonging and a sense of purpose. And that's what the books are about. And from my point of view, they are spiritual journeys. But I'm hoping for those people who don't want a God or need a God or have a God, which is just fine with me. I have no need to proselytize, that they are also humanist journeys as well.
I'd just say that the way you just spoke about your books is a reason why so many of us love them. The genuineness, the openness, that the way you share the pain, as well as so much about being human that comes through in the books. And I was always struck by that letter, I forget which mystery it was, that you wrote a letter prefacing the mystery, talking about your books as your children. I think so many of us feel how much they matter to you and to us.
They do. I have no children. And so this is, if I have a legacy, it's this. And so I pour everything. I create one thing in a year. One thing. It better be worth my time, and it sure as hell better be worth your time and your money and your effort.
Well, the person in the novels who leads us through these journeys is Armand Gamache. And when I read him, well, first of all, I think many of us in the room are half in love with him. And I know that you modeled him on your late husband, Michael. You've said that in many interviews. But I also always think he must have been difficult to create because he's not eccentric. I think it's so much easier to create that kind of detective who has all of those oddities.
The affectations.
And doesn't interact with the world well. He's in the center of a community.
Right.
And I'd like you to talk a little bit about creating.
Well, that was, every decision I made, Maureen, was because I didn't actually think that the book, I wanted it to be published and I wanted it to be a series. But I knew the chances were very small that it actually would be published, still life, and then grow into a series. So every decision I made was selfish because I thought that was going to be the only reward I would get. So when it came to creating Gamache, I had heard that Agatha Christie, who I love and I still read, but that she grew weary of Poirot. And I think one of the reasons she grew weary of Poirot was that he didn't change, he didn't evolve. He was essentially the same person in 1919 when she started the first book as he was when she died. and when he died in the 1960s. So I really wanted someone who would grow and evolve. But mostly, I just wanted someone who I wouldn't grow tired of. And I thought, now how do I do that? How do I mitigate against that? And I thought, really the only way to do it is to create a character I would marry. And so that's what I did. And I sure didn't want to marry an alcoholic. I didn't want to marry someone who's embittered. I didn't want to marry an adulterer. I wanted to marry someone whose company I would always enjoy and who I would find fascinating and a decent human being and a good human being. And also, as I said, because probably the only enjoyment I would get would be the writing of the books. Yeah. So every day I go down, I'm in his company, and I loved writing still life. And then, thank God, 13 books later, oddly enough, I don't know if you've noticed it, but he does not seem to be aging quite as fast as I am. It's a miracle.
It's great. And you've just reassured us that he's not going to be thrown over the Reichenbach Falls or gotten rid of it. No, it's great.
No, I don't know. I don't know why do writers do that? I mean, I can see growing tired. I mean, I've not grown tired yet of any of my characters, but I could see maybe it happening. But why do you have to make it so final?
Yeah.
I don't do.
And then write a sequel where
the whole Bobby Ewing thing comes. Then Gamache comes out of the shower. Yeah. It was just a. Well, only someone with gray hair would know that reference.
Let's talk for a bit about Glass Houses, which has just come out in paperback. If you haven't read it, of course you're in for a treat. The opening situation is that it's Halloween in Three Pines, and we have this mysterious figure cloaked head to toe in black, masked, comes into the village, and everyone begins talking about why is this very unsettling figure that looks like something out of Edgar Allan Poe, why is this figure standing there? It turns out that the figure is something called a Cobra Door.
Yes.
A centuries-old figure from Spain.
Yes.
Would you talk a bit about that?
Do you want me to talk about how I found out about the Cobra
Yes,
Door?
because how on earth did you stumble across
this? That's a good question.
Okay. Yeah.
Michael's best friend, Michael went to Cambridge, and his best friend there became the editor of the Financial Times in Madrid. And he came to visit us once, and we were sitting around chatting, and he said, you've probably never heard of this thing, but every now and then I'm walking through Barcelona, and I'll run into this figure. He's not actually the way I describe him, but a Cobra Door is a debt collector. And what he is, he's all dressed very formally with a top hat and tails and carrying a briefcase. And he stands out in front of someone's home. And when they come out, he follows them at a respectful distance, never speaks, never engages them, follows them to work, stands outside of the office building. When the guy goes for lunch, follows him to lunch, stands outside the restaurant, just silent, staring. And everybody knows what a Cobra Door is. It's a debt collector. And clearly this person has not paid a debt. And the idea is the power of shame. They are humiliating this person into paying a debt. The Cobra Door that shows up in Three Pines, once they realize who this figure is, who's standing on the village green just staring, is a much older version of the modern Cobra Door. And this version is a conscience. And the debt that he's come to collect is a moral debt, not a financial one. And it's what I found fascinating is that every person in Three Pines is suddenly afraid that he's there for them because we all have a moral debt that has been unpaid.
It's terrifying.
I actually found it kind of terrifying too. And there's a scene in the book, and I know many of you have probably read it. There's a scene in the book where they're all sitting around and they confess what that moral debt is. that they all have.
Yeah, it's terrifying. You're bringing back a crime from the past that has to be solved, which so many mysteries do. It's part of the form that, something from the past doesn't let go and comes back.
Yes.
But what you also do so beautifully is you seem to use your mysteries as social criticism as well, social commentary. And there's usually a plot that comments on society today. In this book, it's something about the opioid crisis.
Right.
And I think that's a particular strength of mysteries, yours and so many other mysteries, that they can do that. They can act as our modern form of social fiction.
I think the mystery form, in any form, even cozies, is just such a malleable and powerful form. What better way to investigate the human condition than when some crime has happened or about to happen? And yes, in this case, it's the opioid epidemic and Gamache having to face and spar with his own conscience. And each of my books is inspired often by a bit of poetry or a quote. And in this particular book, the quote is from Gandhi. And I'm just trying to, I probably won't get it absolutely right, but Gandhi said that there is a higher court than the court of law, and that's the court of the conscience, which supersedes all other courts. Which sounds good, because Gandhi said it after all, and who's going to fight with Gandhi? Until you start thinking, like in Gandhi's hands, that's not too bad. But how many vile acts have been committed in the name of the conscience? And in this case, Gamache is struggling with his own conscience of having to do, when you're faced with such a monster like the opioid epidemic and those who traffic in it, do you have to do something monstrous to fight it? And Gamache is struggling with that. And among the things he thinks about was Churchill having to turn a blind eye, knowing that Coventry was going to be bombed, and having to allow it to be bombed, and all those deaths and all that destruction, because he knew that if he didn't, the Germans would know they'd broken the code, and he needed that to be kept secret. So he sat there that night and allowed Coventry to be bombed. And the other is the conquistadors landing and burning the ships so that you can't go back. And that becomes a leitmotif through the book of burning your ships. You can't go back. Do something for which there is no return. And that's what Gamache, who is a good man and a moral man, and he's people who he trusts and believes, including Beauvoir, are begging him not to do it. And he's struggling with himself.
You're talking about these larger-than-life incidents and decisions, and I want to carry that forward to ask you a question about the structure of this book and so many others of your mysteries. By my count, you've had at least 4 apocalyptic endings in your novels.
You're welcome.
And I'm going to ask you, the most useless question, but how do you do it?
Oh, no Maureen question. Maureen Corrigan questions ever useless.
How do you, I can't imagine how you work yourself up, just technically as a writer, to the plot exploding the way it does at the end here. The tension is such that as a reader, I'm not just saying this. I know that I'm not breathing. I'm not doing my yogic breathing as I'm reading. Do you have a sense of the ending when you start, or does the story lead you along?
I sometimes do. Sometimes it's something, and I'm being absolutely honest with you because it sounds so banal. Sometimes early on, even before I've started writing it, I'll see something, and in this case, it's so embarrassing. I know you won't tell anyone. But I had a vision of Gamache running through, I guess I was walking the dog or something through the forest, and running through a forest, between the trees and through the sunshine, just running like hell-bent. He's not a young man, running. And I thought, now, well, what's that about? What would make him do that? And what's he running toward, and who's he running after with such determination that he would, you could see that if he's going to catch up with whatever, it's going to kill him to try to do it. So that's one of the things that spurs me on. So I don't know the exact ending necessarily, or that it would be necessarily apocalyptic. I have to say that one of the challenges, I mean, there were many challenges in this book structurally, but one of the challenges when there is an ending like that, like there was in How the Light Gets In, for instance, was another one, and, is to make it believable. Because it's so important to me. These aren't Mission Impossible type things where they're always blowing up things and running around and falling on the ground and having fist fights and stuff. These are, I hope, characters that we can believe in and that we identify with. And so to have Gamache and Beauvoir and the others be doing this, even though they're Sûreté officers, and so it's not completely unbelievable that they would, that you have to not be reading it and go, oh, for God's sake. You have to be with them and understand where this is coming from, and that they themselves. I mean, there's a scene in this where Gamache is in the bistro, without going into too much detail. This is before the alien invasion. Gamache is just sitting in the bistro with Reine-Marie is there and Ruth is there, and so are the bad guys. They're at another table. And Gamache knows that they're there, but nobody else knows who they are and what's about to happen. And so those are the quiet moments that for me are in many ways more apocalyptic than the running through the woods. Is that, oh my God, what's going to happen?
Yeah, it's wonderful. I've been told we just have 15 minutes left, and I want to leave time for audience questions. Yes. So I want to ask you this. I read your New York Times interview a few weeks ago, yes. The By the Book interview,
yes.
Where you said, and I want to try to quote you correctly, but because you say it better than I would if I just summarized it. You said that you realize that all your books circle around the same theme, our yearning to belong, our quest for home. Would you talk about that?
I guess not.
It's a big one. It's Homeric.
I've searched. Growing up, I was very lonely, and I was always self-excluded, and so the idea of belonging was a yearning that I always had. I always felt like I was just outside the ring of the campfire, in the darkness and the cold, and seeing everyone there and wanting to go and join the circle, but afraid they wouldn't let me in. And so for me, and then later in life, to find it in my little village in the Eastern Townships where Michael and I moved, to find love with Michael, to find belonging in a 12-step group, to be given a second chance, and then to find home, and to know how precious that is, and how it changes your life, and how it gives you courage to do things that you may not normally do, because you can always go home and lick your wounds, and that people will put their arms around you and say, you know what, it's okay. It's okay, and you'll be okay, and it'll get better. And mean it, and not run away from you. And so that's what Three Pines is about. Three Pines is about belonging. It's about people who accept you no matter what. I mean, they accept Ruth, they accept...
Well, I have something here that is going to get me mobbed as I try to exit. This is the next one. The Kingdom of the Blind, which is coming out November 27th.
Thank you.
And I'm about halfway through. It's another, I don't know how you do it. It really is just magnificent. It opens with a house that is no longer a home.
Yes.
This kind of
Yes, good for
skeletal
you, yes.
vision of a house that's terrifying because it's been drained of what makes a house a home. So you'll love it. I'm not giving my copy away. Thank you, Louise Penny. It has been such a pleasure.
Thank you, Maureen Corrigan, the
speak
best,
with you.
the most intelligent reviewer.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And we've got time for some questions, 10 minutes. So if you would come up to the microphones.
Oh, and can I just suggest too, because all the books are so interrelated now, and I know that some of you haven't read all of the books, and we're going to lock the doors and not let you out till you have. But if you could try not to have any spoilers, that would be good. And I don't simply mean who murdered whom, but character development as well is. So I think if you just praise me, that would probably. I think that would be the safest.
Well, I'll start by saying I love all your books. They're fabulous. As somebody who was born and raised in Montreal, but I've lived here for a number of years too, I was just wondering, this is probably an easy question, no spoilers. Is there any town in the Eastern Townships like Three Pines? Are other places that I've come across, for example, are they real? For example, the Gilbertine Monastery in Saint-Gilbert-sur-les-Loups or something?
Oh,
is that real?
Saint-Gilbert entre les loups.
Entre les loups. I couldn't even
Yes.
remember. Are these real places?
No. But you know, one thing I think I did wrong was I'm glad that I created Three Pines as a almost mythical place. It certainly doesn't exist, and except I talk about this a little bit at the end of one of the books that Three Pines, and I mean this sincerely. I think of Three Pines as a state of mind. That when I choose to be kind instead of making the cutting remark, when I search out goodness, and when I'm decent, then I live in Three Pines, which means I carry it with me wherever I go, and so do you. And I know when I'm beyond the pale, when I've done something unpleasant. But there are, what I hope I've captured is the sense of these villages that I live in and around, like Knowlton, Quebec, is where I actually live, and it's quite like Three Pines, much bigger, but it is like Three Pines. So,
Thank you.
Thank you.
Louise, thank you so much for creating a place I just want to revisit over and over again, and for the inspiration that I feel, particularly from Gamache. And my question is, I noticed that I think in almost all the books I've read so far, Gamache repeats something that he says his mentor taught him. 4 things that you need if you want to be wise. The 4 things are: I'm sorry, I was wrong, I don't know, I need help.
Yes.
Thank you so much for that.
Yes.
And where did it come from?
Where did it come from?
Yeah.
Thank you for remembering all 4. I almost always remember 3, and then So thank you for saying it yourself. I thought, oh no, she's going to ask me what they are. Oddly enough, the first time I met Michael, he was chairing a meeting, and you normally open a meeting with reading of the minutes and blah 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 blah, and he said, you know, I'm going to start off this meeting by talking about the 4 statements that lead to wisdom. And he paused, and he looked at everybody. He was like, oh, for God's sake. And he said those 4 things, paused, and then went on with the rest of the meeting. And I thought, now there is an extraordinary man.
Wonderful story. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I started your books last October. I finished them about 6 weeks ago. I've brought a ton of friends to Three Pines with me. We're having a Three Pines party in December.
Oh, beautiful.
So excited. When you wrote Still Life, how much did you know about these characters? With no spoilers.
Right. How much did I know about the characters when I started Still Life? I certainly didn't know how they were going to evolve.
Okay.
And that, I enjoy that, trying to leave that relatively organic and just in some ways allowing them to take the path. Some guidance necessary, but no, I didn't know where they would go. I sort of thought of it, I knew it was going to be a series and I wanted them to evolve, so I sort of thought of Still Life as the first cocktail party where you go in and you meet a bunch of people you think, I think they could be friends, but you don't know a great deal about them. You just know that you like them. And then the second book is maybe that first lunch. Then the third book, well, let's have dinner together. And so there's an exposition that happens, an evolution of intimacy.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for your books. I also grew up in Montreal and have been going back more and more. And I've been translating a Yiddish poet who comes from Galicia but lived in Montreal for a long time, Rachel Korn. And often in her poems, again and again, Three Pines come up that act as guardians for her childhood home, which she sort of mythologizes. So when I read your books and I read her poems, it's like, what is this with these three pine image? But my other question is, I go back again and again to Montreal, and I'm bilingual. And how do you navigate that? You have these characters with names like Jean-Luc and Gamache, but we're clearly in English Canada. How do you think that through?
Well, I want to give the sense of the bilingual and bicultural nature,
Right.
because I think that's really rich and rich ground. The question is how much, for me anyway, is how much French to throw in.
Yeah.
So that I give the sense of it. Because clearly, I mean, I'm assuming you know that when Gamache and Jean-Guy and Isabelle are together, they're probably talking French, even though I'm writing it in English, because you would not be here if I was writing the whole thing in French. But that's what, I throw in a oui or d'accord or désolé or something. And, every now and then I'll get an email from someone saying, I don't understand what these words mean, it's really annoying. Surely you can figure it out. When I was first writing Still Life, and I talk about a toque. A toque. I didn't realize that toques are very Canadian and in fact Quebec. And I got an email from my English editor in Britain, in London, who said, "What's a toque?" And I thought, again, it's like minus a gazillion out. Mm-hmm. They're putting something on their head. It's a refrigerator, of course. What do you think a toque could possibly be? So.
We have time, I'm afraid, for one more question.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'm answering two.
I'll try to make it a good one then. I'd like to ask you a little bit about Ruth Zardo. Every time I read one of her poems, I am brought out for a moment thinking how wonderful an example it is of a different voice than what else I am reading. It stands out as really bringing a character to life. It's not just the author's voice, though obviously it is. Mm-hmm. So much so that I even wonder sometimes if you got the poem somewhere else.
I did.
And that's what I would like to know. How do you find those poems, and to what degree, as you're writing, do you make it up right there, or do you have a list of Ruth poems somewhere else that you come up with and stick in when you need them?
Well, I do. When I write, I have cookbooks and poetry books beside me, and most of the Ruth Zardo poems come from Margaret Atwood, from her Morning in the Burned House. Terrible, oh my God, what a title. But it's a great slim volume of poetry, just fabulous poems. So when I'm writing the next book now, actually, and I was writing it this morning in the hotel room, and I'm thinking, God, this would be a great place for that particular part of that poetry. So that's Ruth. Ruth is someone who, you know, we all have thankfully a public face, right, in which we know that we say polite things to each other, and we keep our more hideous thoughts inside, like, you know, yes, this looks gorgeous on me, you know, but God knows what you're really thinking. And so thank God we have a public face, but Ruth was born inside out. And the challenge is not making her a caricature. So I really appreciate that you all see her as a woman in full and not as just a crotchety old you-know-what. So thank you for that. That means a lot to me.
Thank you, Louise Penny.
Thank you. Thank you all. Thank you so much.